Good morning. Good morning and welcome. It is great to see all of you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. As we start today, I'd just like to recognize a few people. I want to recognize Tula, who helped put all this together, the team here, our AV team. Most importantly, I want to thank all of you for joining today. We worked really hard to put together what I hope is an informative and useful talk for you in terms of our state of research. I was thinking back, I think this is our sixth state of research. This is something we started during COVID as a way to come together as a research community and talk about some of the issues that are going on. And this year, there's a number of things to talk about. So hopefully this is useful for you. There is a time at the end for questions. And if anything's burning, feel free. I'll try to interrupt as we go. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to talk about the research landscape. We're going to focus on the national situation as well as the local situation. So we've been working on some data points I hope are illustrative. We'll talk about our campus response. A lot of things have happened this last year. How have we responded? How do we continue to respond? We're going to say a little bit about our great team here, the OVCR office. We consider ourselves to be your partners in research. We believe that very strongly, and we appreciate the partnership we have. There's some campus highlights. We could do a 3-hour talk about the campus highlights and not hit them all. So we're going to do a few, and hopefully those are useful for us. We've got some things in terms of looking ahead as well. So let's shift to the landscape situation. You've probably seen some version of this slide in our previous talks. It just sort of sets the table in some ways of the big things that are going on. So we have a large number of grants and contracts that come in through our delightful team at OGC, over 3,000 every year. If we look at the top line number for our external research funding this year, 762 million. That's the highest number we've had to date. So despite everything that's happened over the last 12 months, we remain remarkably productive as a faculty. We've got a lot of active principal investigators. I think when I first started doing this, the number was closer to 1.5. It's now about 1,800. And again, if you just take any area, take human subjects research studies, we have a large number of those going on at any given time. We started to look at the data. We saw an increase in the number of applications submitted. So this is specifically looking at NIH applications. This is over the federal fiscal year. A couple of things you see here. In those gold bars, this is for our campus submissions. There are a lot that went in 2020. So one of the things we think this was a national trend, people had time to submit grants. We saw that number go from well over 1,000 to the 800s. Over the last several years now, including 2025, we again saw over 1,000 new and competitive renewals that were submitted. It's a little hard to make a lot out of the number of awarded applications just because we're early in the process. I'm sorry, we haven't quite finished the year, but we'll see where that sorts out. So this is, again, a very important graph. This looks at our campus research funding at a large scale. It gives you some longitudinal data. So we go back to 2020. We can see it's about $599 million of external sponsored research funding. This last year, we moved up with 762. Now, one interesting part of this in the bottom is the federal percentage. So federal funding, for multiple reasons, is really important to us as an institution, as a group. That number of 51%, if you look, is a little different than previous years. So we'll dive into that just a little bit. Here's a breakdown of our campus funding by source. So this is the full number. So you see that 51% there for federal, approximately $390 million. One thing that has changed the last few years in the top left there is the industry. So the amount of industry funding and contracts we've had has been increasing. That equaled 165 million this year. If you look at associations and hospitals and universities, those would be subcontracts, that 10% number is pretty stable over time. Now, if we dive a little bit more into the federal, a couple of interesting things here. So NIH is 79%, about $306 million. If you look at the rest of this, we see ARPA-H and DOD. Actually, ARPA-H was slightly above DOD this year. And we can talk about ARPA-H a little bit. It's administratively within the NIH. It doesn't report up through the NIH director. It has some different legislation around it. So we separate it out here for illustrative reasons and to think about that. But that's really our second leading funding source, edging out the DOD this year. And that's an important thing. That's a new resource, a new opportunity for us. DOD is there, DHHS continues. This was an interesting graph. It took us a little time to put this one together, but there's some interest there. So we saw the industry go up a little bit, which helped us keep that top line number. We saw the federal go down a little bit during our calendar year. And I'll just mention that our calendar year is different than the federal fiscal year. So we'll talk more about that. Now, if you look across this, You see that 390 number again. So that really correlates with 2 years ago, and it is a bit down from last year. If you look at that 79%, again, if you look above this, we had some years where NIH, that's what we're showing here, was above 85%. So when you're that dependent or are using that one institute that much, because there's some potential risk in that. So we've made conscious efforts to try to diversify our funding portfolio. The other interesting thing here is to look at the ARPA-H. So in this segment over here, that's really helped us maintain our overall funding picture with a relatively new source. And as you talk to investigators, we now have a number of successful investigators. It's a different mechanism. There's a different approach that's needed. There's a different way to interact with our office and our team here about this. We'll say more later. We're really pleased to see that and appreciate all the efforts of those who successfully pursued that. Okay, so we talked a bit more about the federal landscape. I was in a meeting in Washington mid-year, and Jay Bhattacharya spoke for over an hour, hitting on some of these emerging scientific priorities for the NIH. And then this publication came out in August of 2025. So we're starting to get some indications now of where the NIH may be focusing their priorities in the future. It's going to be a little hard to read this first year because there are a lot of different things going on. One thing that he emphasized in his comments, and certainly came through this document, is training awards. They identify and acknowledge the critical importance of training awards. Would also acknowledge in some spoken comments that some of the pipeline programs were affected this last year, and that was part of the transition. It wasn't part of the long-term plan. Another thing that was really emphasized is replication and reproducibility. Now, I'd say that's not something a couple of years ago we would have had on the radar per se, but it is something that we see now. He gave examples, Dr. Bhattacharya, about research that's not replicable, right? People can't replicate it, and that the NIH does not fund such research. So I anticipate that we'll see specific opportunities to replicate key findings in other labs. The details of how it's going to work, we don't quite know, but that was a real strong emphasis. Real world data platforms. I think we'll see more in that area too. The NIH itself may develop some resources that people can use in that realm. Again, more to see with that. Artificial intelligence, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. They are as well. There weren't a lot of specifics on that. There was a fair amount of discussion, both in the document and those spoken words, about nutrition and chronic disease. One word that was used frequently was a lifespan approach to it. So our campus, with the lead center, Accords, and other groups on campus, we have some real expertise in lifespan research, looking at conditions in pediatric exposures that lead to lifelong chronic conditions. So that's a potential really significant opportunity for our campus. Autism is specifically discussed in several medias, so in the causes of autism. Alternatives to animal testing models. So there was a number of announcements that went out about this. I think we reiterated a couple of those. There's clearly some interest in looking at alternative animal models, alternatives to animal models. I suspect that that's going to be a long-term situation, not a short-term. There's some speculation you might have to actually do more animal modeling to develop those models. So we don't anticipate any change in the near term, but it's something we're watching carefully. Another question I think we had from a lot of people were health outcomes. How is that being looked at? The terminology that you see used in some of this documentation and also in those conversations is emphasizing the scientific nature of the outcomes that are used and identifying those and having strong literature to support the endpoints in certain studies. There's also a fair amount of discussion around disparities research. And the emphasis there was on solution-oriented outcomes. It was a very specific language you see repeated over and over again. I think we'll learn more about these priorities over time. This was the first, I think, written document that's summarized in a way that was accessible. And for those of you that haven't looked at it, it's probably worth a read. It's 4 or 5 pages. Now, again, if we were sitting here mid-year, one of the concerns we had, this is a graphic from the AAMC, and there's others out there. If you looked at the calendar year, this year compared to last, in the NIH distribution of funds, there was a gap. There was about a $5 billion gap. So we saw administratively there was some delay in getting the funds out. There was a question if all the funds would be distributed for the year. Now, I had hoped that we could show you the regular federal funds by December, but with the government shutdown, that's not available. So we did something a little different here, again, with the help of the great teams here. We essentially took our funding data of the last several years and oriented from our calendar. So again, we go from July to June and moved it to the federal calendar, which is October as a start date. So again, think of all of our data now looking at the federal calendar. The one thing we can do in that case in the bottom right is show what happened in the fourth federal quarter. In fact, let's look at that far right column, $367 million for the federal fiscal year 2025. If you look at the top goal, that's the first quarter and the second, third, fourth quarter. Now, the first three quarters were a little slim. That was causing some concern. We thought there was a delay in getting money out. I showed you the other graph. A lot of funds came in the fourth quarter. Now, I think you got to be careful how you interpret that. I would say there was some catch up there. There was some forward funding there. There were non-competing continuations and so forth. But I would say this, I was concerned if we go back to this slide, I think a lot of us, are all the funds going to be distributed? From what we can see locally, it looks like they were. Now there's concerns about forward funding. So in other words, you take a grant and rather than giving 1 year funding, you maybe distribute 2 or 3 or 4 years. We certainly have seen some of that, not widespread, but seen some of that. But at least those funds are out. So I think that's some interesting data there and encouraging in that regard. There's a lot to say about some areas of uncertainty. I've highlighted a couple here, and again, happy to talk at questions at the end if there's additional there. Certainly some uncertainty around funding. What are the priorities? How will those be applied? What's the timing? What areas are going to be prioritized and deprioritized? There's been delays in study sections of council, so I think a lot of us have been worried about that. You may have seen this recent announcement, an emergency modification of peer review or scientific review. I think that's an effort to continue to look at awards and grant those. So in some ways, encouraged by that, clearly an effort to try and do that. We actually just got through the largest or longest federal shutdown in history. So what's the impact of that? I think those of us that have been involved in study sections are watching different communications, again, clear efforts to get that going. And one thing, again, we could talk about the Q&A if there's additional questions is, and I get a lot of questions about this, what's the model for indirect rates going forward? Is it a cap? Is there a fair model or something else? And that continues to be something that's being discussed, I would say. Another thing, again, I've got a fair amount of questions about this. If we look at what to expect, the NIH budget for fiscal year 25 in federal terms, $46.8 billion. Now, in the initial budget came out from the administration, $27 billion was very concerning for us. I think a lot of us noticed there was a delta there that was concerning. We've now got the House and the Senate proposals, both with slight increases. So I think what we're anticipating at this point, you could see flat. There might be a political compromise to have flat funding. You could see a little uptake. I think the $27 billion, which would have a substantial impact on us, that's our 80% funder federally, seems much less likely. I like data. So there's a lot of data. I didn't talk too fast this year. Campus response, we've done a few things to help respond to this and keep in touch with you. We, with the help of a lot of people, set up a website specific for researchers. I think last time I looked, there were 5,000 or 6,000 visits to that site over the last few months as people went to that as a source. We continue to have that up, so it's someplace you can go with questions. We started these virtual town halls. We're not quite sure if they'd be of interest. At first one, I think 500 or 600 people signed up or something like that. So we have now 8 of those. The last one was a little bit less attended. Government reopened, so I think we're going to pull back a little bit, but we certainly have the capacity and the desire to do those sort of things if they're helpful with these changes. I think a lot of us, myself, campus leadership, many of the deans have gone to Washington with the help of our federal relations team at CU and interacted with our representatives and key leaders. I would say another way we responded is through legal means. If you look at that indirect rate, for example, we worked with the Attorney General's office to be a party to some of those different matters. So there's several ways that we have responded to the changes that we've seen. All right, now to say a few things about our office here. So we consider ourselves your partner in research. So if you think of the mission of our office, it's committed to a team-based culture. We engage and collaborate with the research community to provide expertise, support, and guidance for the advancement of science. And our vision, very simply, is together we make tomorrow's research happen. So if you think about the different entities that are involved in supporting research, so if you think about where research starts and how it's submitted and how it's supported, there's a whole life cycle you can kind of think of through that. And we hit many of those different life cycle points, whether it's research development strategy, we'll talk more about that later. If it's grants and contracts that help with the submission, regulatory compliance to make sure we abide by all the rules that are required, basic science support, laboratory animal resources, clinical trial support, and a variety of different matters. Or of course, the CCTSI, there's a whole team of great people who are involved in that research. So I wonder, how about anybody that's a member of the OVCR in the audience? Maybe just have you stand up so we can recognize who's here. I think they're not going to stand up, right? Come on, stand up. There you go. Thank you for that. Thanks for standing up. Here's a look at our leadership team, and I'd say it's a great leadership team, decades of experience here and expertise at hand. I'd say there are two major changes this year, just to mention. First of all, Ben Achale, who's been with our institution for many years, stepped away from his leadership role and moved. So we appreciate that everything Ben has done for us, the institution over the years. Cecilia Lowong has stepped into that role and is doing an outstanding job with the focus on IND submissions, CREST, and some of the support mechanisms around that. Dit Gindi has also joined our team in a new position focused on clinical trials. There's also a position that Dit holds in the School of Medicine, which gives him a nice coordination ability there. His focus initially has been on clinical trial startup and multi-center trials, so we're delighted to have them join our team. One of the neat things in this role, and I've had the pleasure to do this now for a little bit of time, is to work with researchers who are on the discovery side of science, people that are working at the bench to make basic science discoveries. Those individuals working on clinical trials, implementation, and population health. And you can go through this spectrum from T1 to T4 and find wonderful examples within our community of people doing this work in many different ways. And we work to have an ecosystem around that to support these very different types of research. If you think about somebody doing bench work versus somebody who's at the population level, there's a variety of different resources that are needed for those individuals. One thing we've worked on for many years, and we've continued to improve and modify, is our communication approach. Would note our website, which continues to be updated and refreshed, is available. We just looked last year, there were 72,000 visits to our website. So there's a lot of people using that as a primary source of information. We started the research bulletin that comes out every 2 months. We try to summarize each of our different areas in that regard, so you can see what's coming that way. We added the funding focus a number of years ago now, and that's a very succinct way of getting specific research funding opportunities. It's a great read. It comes out every 2 weeks, and I encourage you to find all those different things. I would mention that the research and report will be released the next issue of Science Matters. A lot of excitement around that, so be watching for that as well. Wanted to highlight just a few of the units within the OVCR and talk a bit more about that. So one is the Office of Laboratory Animal Resources, obviously doing wonderful work, a group of around 100 people that are supporting our work in that area. Would also say that there's a lot of outreach. So we think it's very important to have community outreach in a variety of different manners. So OLAR does host a biomedical research boot camp where they bring in students from the community to experience some of what we do here, understand research. I think a lot of us feel very strongly it's important to engage with the community, to bring them into our centers so they can see what we're doing here. Would also mention that Lauren Habernick, from one of the veterinarians there, received an award, the AALAS Public Outreach Award at the recent national meeting for her work with this outreach. So we recognize that and the wonderful work going on there. EH&S does so much to help us. I think a lot of us saw the special role they played during the pandemic, of course. We think about the things in occupational health, all the things they do for our safety, the different wastes that we produce that they help us take care of are important. One special project they had this last year was working with our cesium irradiators. We had 2 cesium irradiators. There are some potential risk around that approach. It was done 20 some years ago and things have changed. So with their help, we used a federal program to remove both of those irradiators. For those that might have been adjacent to that, it was a little hush-hush at the time. So a few people asked me, I said, I don't know. So those are now removed. You can see what an elaborate process it is here. One of the things we did is we wanted to have a strong faculty connection around these things, particularly as we installed these new irradiators. So we're delighted to have David Westerly join. So David is an associate professor in radiation oncology. He's serving now as a co-director for the Animal Imaging and Irradiation Shared Resource. He can provide expertise in another faculty liaison role in that area. So we're delighted by that as well. The CCTSI does such wonderful work in so many ways. Just to highlight a few of the things they do for anybody new to campus or hasn't looked, they have a wonderful array of support awards and pilot awards, mentored and junior faculty awards. There's specific CU, CSU team awards in a variety of different areas you see there. Had a chance to go to Children's Hospital and see their CTRC a while back. Like to get out and see different things that are going on. And one of the things that highlighted for me there was the cystic fibrosis research that they've done there, the success they've had, including some of these remarkable drugs that have shown remarkable clinical results, and they played a key part in. Really great work. And then one of the other things I think the CCTSI does that's so important is they serve as a way for us to, for our campus to interact with other CU campuses, with other institutions within our state. They've got a CSU Summit. It's the 13th annual. This was focused on chronic disease research, very well attended as always. So watch for what's coming this next year. Another thing I'll say is that it was a number of years ago, I think once the pandemic was maybe settling just a little bit, a number of investigators came up to us and they wanted to work on social media campaigns for clinical trial recruitment. And honestly, it's a fairly difficult area. There's certain regulations, there's certain ways you interact with the social media platforms, there's some CU rules. It was a very complicated thing, but we all worked together to develop a process and a team that could help with social media campaigns. The other thing is some people are spending a lot of money externally and not getting great results. So I just wanted to highlight some of the outcome of those different requests. So if you look at this broadly, it started in 2024, now 25, you can see that the number of campaigns has been increasing over time. Now the cost of these campaigns is pretty reasonable. So it's $300 to $500 in many cases. These campaigns will last about 6 days, but you can see it's a way to reach people, which would be hard outside of a place like social media. You can look at the average clicks. So this is one of the main metrics that people use in assessing these social media campaigns. Is your ad seen, and more importantly, is it clicked? So one example of this is a particular study. This is a real example. So trying to do a very specific kind of recruitment, right? These are for patients in non-metropolitan areas in the Colorado area. Had to be a breast or prostate cancer survivor. They had to be interested in a fitness study, so in outstate Colorado. So 6-day campaign, $500, focused on 10 Colorado zip codes. So again, try to imagine doing this in other ways. It would be quite difficult. The numbers are kind of interesting. So 18,000 people see it, 800 people click on it, 44 complete the form. In the day, you have 14 eligible patients. So it's a lot of work to get to that. But to identify 14 patients and other means, I think it'd be quite tricky. So there's a quote here from the team talking about how well this worked for them. And it's great to see their works in place. So I think it's a great resource for people. Recruitment to clinical trials has been an area where we've had asks or requests for help, and I think we made good progress there. So another thing to mention here is the other things we're doing on social media. You know, I think one thing we found that in the pandemic is important for us to proactively communicate about what we do here and how we do it to the people that are involved. In some ways, clinical trials, there's some mystery around it for patients. So there's been a whole series in social media campaign focused on patients and how do these things work? How do we do research? Explain that sort of thing. There's also a secondary, I guess, gain in the sense it shows people this kind of work, right? So people are looking for work. What does a clinical research do in that regard? So this particular video is one that they produced for that matter. It involves showing what we do on a day-to-day basis. It highlights Maddie Flynn from the Department of Neurology. Let's see if this works.
Hi, my name is Maddie, and I'm a clinical research coordinator in the Department of Neurology. As a coordinator, I work with people who have ALS, and I help run a clinical trial that's hoping to find a treatment. During today's visit, my participant and I are going to do some breathing tests and measure muscle strength. Sometimes research can seem intimidating, but I always make sure that my participant is well informed and understands that they can stop whenever they want. It's such a privilege to work with our participants, and without them, none of this research would be possible. After finishing our visit, I start working on entering everything into our secure database. Interested in learning more about participating in clinical research here at CU Anschutz? Check out our research studies website to learn more.
Is Maddie here today? All right, go Maddie. I think she did a great job. But what a great way to reach out to patients, people that might be interested in this kind of work, and it's just an example of some of that. Okay, we're going to transition a bit now to partnering across campus. So again, we're talking about clinical research right now. One of the key aspects of clinical research for us is partner with our wonderful hospital partners on campus. Talking about Children's Hospital to start, several major initiatives that they've been undertaking that make it easier to conduct clinical research. One is Mosio, which is a way to communicate with patients on trial. Certainly during the pandemic, we found it was sometimes difficult in a secure manner to communicate with people. It's really important to have that as an option. The CCHRI, the Colorado Child Health Research Institute, is a wonderful centralized resource. Again, I've had a chance to visit it on several occasions and see the wonderful work they're doing, streamlining processes and reducing the administrative burden. It's a wonderful resource for pediatric clinical research. In addition, they've done the recent addition of Florence e-binders, so a way to electronically store some of these important subject and regulatory documents that are necessary. They've also developed a wonderful dashboard that helps to track the clinical trial along the way. I'd also like to mention that there's a committee, the Coordination and Integration Committee. I had a chance to interact with that many times. This is with representatives from CU and Children's Hospital of Colorado, working to align our strategies. And I think we'll find more of the endpoints on that and the outcome of that, but there's some great synergy happening there. And I think we're going to see really some great improvements of how we work together to the benefit of researchers through that effort. I'd also like to mention the wonderful work that's being done at UC Health. Recruit, as we were talking about, we were just talking about social media. So the need to reach out to people, make them aware of things. Oftentimes you can do that within the electronic medical record. Patient's already there. It takes a lot of coordination and so forth. So the Recruit program strives to do that, reach patients specifically through the electronic medical record. So again, tens of thousands of patients have responded to some specific inquiries. These include first-time participants, people that are less familiar with clinical research. And there's now 1,500 newly consented patients via that method. So it's a really important way to think about accomplishing clinical research. In addition, they've developed along the lines of what we just talked about, this research care journey, so a way to think and communicate with patients as they go through the journey of clinical research, which we know at times can be quite complicated. They've also implemented a Part 11 compliant e-consent. So again, one of the things we learned in the pandemic is being able to electronically do things, properly consent patients in a way that's FDA compliant is really critical. So wish to recognize the great work being done by both hospitals to support clinical research. Okay, now we're going to talk about campus research highlights. So again, you could do 2 or 3 hours about this and just touch it. So we're just going to mention a few specific projects today. So AB Nexus, when I first started this role, I made a trip up to Boulder and I met with Terry Fees, my colleague up there at the time. We had some great conversations and we endeavored to start a process by which we could formalize the interaction between Anschutz and Boulder. AB Nexus is the Anschutz Boulder Nexus, and we've been continuing this now since 2020. I would say as you watch the awards come in for this, these are some of the most innovative things that we do. You've got biomedical-oriented, clinical research-oriented investigators here with more natural science and oriented investigators at Boulder. You can see from the 2025 award-winning teams here on the left side, a focus on quantum. So a major emphasis in Boulder and a way that we can work our biomedical interest into those different things. For example, Dan LaBarbera from the School of Pharmacy talked about harnessing AI quantum computing for colorectal cancer therapies, and also work using quantum sensing to detect pneumonia and asthma in children. So a great example of how we can stimulate work on research between our campuses. ARPA-H we've talked about a couple of times. So again, a relatively new mechanism, one that moves pretty quickly and at times is a complex situation. However, it's a great opportunity to really address and approach complicated scientific problems. Now, if you look at the first team here, so it's Karen Payne and Michael Zisik, NITRO is novel innovations for tissue regeneration and osteoarthritis. So initially, Karen and Mike were working with the Boulder team through AB Nexus. And then when this opportunity came along for ARPA-H, they were positioned in a way to sort of react to that. Also wish to recognize the work by Doctors Washington and Huang regarding human eye allograft. We are the prime for this particular award. It's one of our largest awards, and it's really exciting to see that come together. So I mentioned we had $23 million in ARPA-H funding last year. Our total award, if you look at it over several years, is $70 million. There's about $9 million under negotiation, there's $16 million that is under review. So we continue to see progress in that. I would say for those interested in ARPA-H and looking at that, to interact with our office and research development strategy in particular is really important early on. There's a couple of notable awards that we received this year. There's many. I've picked a couple here. One thing we've talked about a little bit is how we position ourselves in peer institutions around the country. So again, we'll show data later, but the new research development strategy team has looked at some of this data. So you can look at our institution compared to an institution that's rated above us. One thing you'll find sometimes is we have a comparable number of R01 grants. That looks pretty similar. If you look at complex grants, P awards, U awards, they'll oftentimes these other institutions have substantially more of those types of awards. So congratulations to Gene Kuttner, who has this significant U54 grant looking at palliative care across the lifespan. We've also talked about the importance of clinical trials and industry funding. Dit Kinde has a very significant award looking at endotheliopathy and coagulation through an Octapharma trial. So both very important and large grants for our institution. Also say a little bit about the Anschutz Accelerator Initiative. So there's a lot of excitement about this award a number of years ago. I just wanted to give a little update on this. So the teams are all working very hard. This is a $50 million investment from the Anschutz Foundation with clinical impact within 5 years. One of the projects I wanted to focus on today was just to highlight was Jeff Stansberry from the School of Dental Medicine. So he's working on essentially multi-material 3D processing with the integration of antimicrobial substances into dental prosthetics. So by using printing and think about the antimicrobial aspects of that, you can do a couple of things. First of all, you can do this at cost in a very efficient way. You can integrate some antimicrobial essence to it. As I watched Jeff and his team develop this, there's also the cosmetic aspect to it, which is really kind of cool how it all comes together. But it's a great example of using resources and innovative ideas on our campus to impact patients. Yeah, again, something that came out of the pandemic was a campus-wide recognition. So initially, we just wanted to recognize some of the great work people had done during the pandemic. It's a busy time, stressful for researchers. So we recognized faculty, staff, and students. And there was a lot of positive feedback from that. So we expanded this over the last couple of years to have several different categories, including research mentors, and this year, a research sustainability award. So this just closed, thanks to those that have nominated people. There are 212 nominations this year across the different awards categories. Also like to thank, I think we have 3 review committees now to go through all this. So many of the review committee members are people that previously received the award. So that's important in that regard. The thing I just mentioned is that in this very room, I have listened many times to outside speakers that have come in and given grand rounds and given wonderful presentations, and I've learned a lot. But one of the things I think we came to conclude, this is a conversation with many faculty members, is we didn't have a way to recognize great researchers on our campus who are doing great work and learn from them and see them present. So we developed the Chancellor's Distinguished Research Lectureship Award. This recognizes 2 faculty members who were selected, particularly for the novelty and impact of their research. So here's the very first awardee for this was Don DeVilla from the School of Public Health, and subsequent David Schwartz from the School of Medicine and Annette Santoro from the School of Medicine have also given their presentations. David Bentley's giving his talk in April of 2026. For those that haven't been able to attend, I think these are some outstanding lectures. First of all, it's a great way to celebrate the work that our faculty are doing. But I must say it's a different kind of a lecture where somebody will come and say, over the last decade or 2, I've been focused on this problem. Here's how I approached it early in my career, I approached it later in my career, and here's the impact I made in that problem. They're wonderful talks. I encourage you to watch your calendar for April 21st. I think we were sold out this last show, so we may need to get a bigger room, but that's a good problem to have. We did it right here, and I think all the seats were taken. Okay, so in our last major segment here, we're going to talk about looking forward. As I've said, there's a lot of change in the federal side of things over this year, and we think that data-driven approaches and analytics are going to be key to our success in the future. So I've mentioned a few times the Office of Research Development Strategy. They have new capacities and personnel working on data. So that includes NIH landscaping data. What's the NIH doing? How do we analyze that? What are the trend lines there? Our own data, so working with OGC, integrating those national trends to the local area. Where are we doing better than the national trend? Where are we falling behind? Where are specific opportunities? Blue Ridge is something that comes up a lot. There's a lot of interest in Blue Ridge. So how to integrate that? We're looking at the NIH and then ourselves. And of course, as you can tell, we've got a lot of focus on ARPA-H and the data that comes out of that. Let me just give one example of this. So if you look at the RCDC codes, these sort of topic codes, of which there are several hundred. You can say, what are the largest codes by the institution or as a whole? So here's looked at as a whole. You can drill down to this in a variety of ways. You can say, well, what's changed? So if you look at infectious disease, this particular code and the funding to this area has actually gone down relative to other areas over the last few years. So there was a bit of a peak during the pandemic, but unfortunately, I've seen this one come down. You can also see trends where something like brain disorders has gone up relative to other areas over time. And again, this is just that high level. You can dig into this in many different ways and look at that. We can also integrate in our local data. So again, if you just say for our campus, looking at the NIH, new and competitive renewals, what's the distribution of award types we have? You can look this by institute or center. You can look at it longitudinally. You can do a variety of things. One of the neat things that the team has shown me several times is if you have a specific mechanism you're going to pursue, an award type, but you have multiple institutes or centers by which you could apply that, you can look at the success rate at different centers and get some history. It's interesting to me that sometimes there's a difference, a significant difference, and that could impact your decision on where you want to submit that. I think it's a great resource. So here I've highlighted the funding strategy resources. We just talked a little bit about the funding landscape and portfolio analysis. What I also mentioned is the virtual grant library. I know some centers, departments, and schools have parts of this in their units. But this would be essentially sample awards. This would be templated awards. It would be a resource page. And people have often said, hey, what are the resources for our campus? You have all that sort of stuff available there. Grant writing and training education. There's some great resources, particularly for people who are less experienced in that area, to learn more about grant writing, training, education. Pivot is our way to look for opportunities. This replaced Spin. We've gotten very good feedback on that. So people that have not used this, I would encourage you to do so. And then there's wonderful resources in this area for complex awards and programs in that regard, including ARPA-H, including NIH. I think Laura in our office and I are working with several complex NIH awards as well. So as we wrap things up, we'll move to questions. Again, I want to make sure I thank everybody who helped put this together, both the data and the slides. So in summary, the federal landscape has undergone significant change this year. We've gotten some indications of how priorities might change, and we'll watch for those. I don't think it's all settled, but we're getting some indication. I think despite all this, this is important. Our campus remains productive, competitive for national grants, and innovative. That's really an important thing to emphasize. We are working in our office to support you with different opportunities. I think you'd see that through things like ARPA-H, but also that landscaping and this analytic data out there. Hopefully that helps you to identify new opportunities, and that would include the resources. For those that have not visited the Research Strategy and Development page, Research Development Strategy page, I invite you to do that. So with that, I'll take a little break and see if there's any questions. Thank you.